The studio lights dimmed to a warm golden glow as Oprah settled into her familiar chair, but something felt different today. The air itself seemed heavier, charged with an anticipation that even the seasoned crew could feel. Across from her sat Amber Heard, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a tissue that had already been twisted into a small knot. The usual pre-interview chatter had been replaced by an almost sacred silence, broken only by the soft hum of cameras and the distant whisper of air conditioning. "I never wanted to be a woman, Oprah." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished flame. Amber's voice was barely above a whisper. Yet every person in the studio heard it clearly. The camera operators continued filming, but you could sense the shift in the room. This was no longer just an interview. Because being a woman, it shouldn't hurt this much. Oprah felt her breath catch. In 30 years of television, she had heard confessions that moved nations, but something about Amber's raw vulnerability struck her differently. This wasn't the actress America had seen in courtrooms or red carpets. This was a woman stripped bare of all pretense. "Tell me what you mean by that, Amber," Oprah said softly, her voice carrying the gentle authority that had comforted millions. Amber looked down at her hands, then back up at Oprah. Her eyes were already glistening with unshed tears that threatened to spill over at any moment. "When I was little, I thought being a woman meant being strong like my mother. Fierce, independent, unstoppable." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "But somewhere along the way, I learned that being a woman meant being questioned, being doubted, being dissected and analyzed by strangers who think they know your story better than you do. Being called a liar when you tell your truth, especially when that truth makes people uncomfortable." The studio audience was completely silent. Even the producers in the control room had stopped their usual chatter. This was television, but it felt like something much more intimate. "The trial changed everything," Amber continued, her voice growing stronger even as tears began to fall. "Not just for me, but for how I see myself, how I see my worth as a woman, as a mother, as a human being." Oprah leaned forward slightly, a gesture that had become her signature move when a guest needed to feel truly heard. "You mentioned being a mother. How has this affected your relationship with your daughter?" And that's when Amber Heard completely broke down. The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, and her shoulders began to shake with the force of emotions she had been holding back for what felt like lifetimes. It wasn't the kind of crying that could be composed or controlled. This was grief in its rawest form, the kind that comes from somewhere so deep that it touches your very soul. The sound filled every corner of the studio, and several audience members found themselves reaching for their own tissues. "She's so innocent," Amber sobbed, her words barely intelligible between gasps that seemed to tear themselves from her chest. "Oonagh is so pure and beautiful, and I'm terrified that one day she'll Google my name and see what the world thinks of her mother. See the headlines, the memes, the hatred." Oprah felt her own eyes filling with tears as she watched this young woman's pain unfold before her. In 3 decades of interviewing, she had developed what some called an emotional radar, an ability to sense when someone needed more than just questions and answers. They needed witness. They needed validation. They needed someone to sit in their darkness with them without trying to fix it. Without hesitation, Oprah rose from her chair and moved to sit beside Amber on the couch, her movement smooth and instinctual, like a mother responding to her child's cry. "Look at me, honey," Oprah said, taking Amber's hands in hers. "Look at me." Amber raised her head, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her breathing still ragged. "Your daughter is going to know who you really are, because you're going to tell her. Not Google, not the internet. You." But Amber shook her head, pulling her hands away. "You don't understand, Oprah. When the whole world believes you're a liar, when millions of people make jokes about your pain, when your own words are turned into memes." She paused, trying to catch her breath. "How do you explain to a child that her mother isn't the monster everyone says she is?" The silence that followed was deafening. Oprah had built her career on finding the right words, on offering comfort and wisdom, but Amber's anguish was so profound that even she found herself speechless. "I wake up every morning thinking about what kind of world I'm raising her in," Amber continued, her voice growing stronger through her tears. though they continued to fall freely. A world where a woman's pain is entertainment. Where speaking your truth makes you a target for millions of strangers who will never know your real story. Where being vulnerable makes you weak instead of brave. Where your worst moments become content for people's amusement. She paused, wiping her nose with a fresh tissue that Oprah quietly handed her. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just stayed quiet. If my silence would have been a better gift to give my daughter than this chaos. Oprah nodded slowly, understanding flooding her face. But you're still here, Amber. You're still fighting. What keeps you going? Amber wiped her face with the tissue, smearing her makeup further. Just her. When I hold Oonagh at night and she looks at me with those trusting eyes, I remember who I really am underneath all the noise. I'm her mother, and I have to be brave enough to teach her that her voice matters, even when the world tries to silence it. The camera captured every nuance of emotion crossing Amber's face, the pain, the love, the fierce determination of a mother protecting her child. Tell me about that voice, Oprah said gently. When did you first realize yours had been silenced? Amber closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength from somewhere deep inside. It happened gradually, so slowly that I didn't even notice at first. One day I was this young actress with dreams and opinions, and then I was someone's wife, someone's problem, someone's victim to be managed and controlled. You're talking about Johnny. The name hung between them like a live wire. Amber flinched slightly but didn't look away. I'm talking about a pattern that started long before Johnny and continued long after. A pattern where my reality became negotiable, where my memories became evidence to be disputed, where my truth became a story to be discredited. Oprah watched as Amber's demeanor shifted. The broken woman was still there, but now there was something else, a flicker of the strength that had carried her through the darkest moments. The hardest part wasn't the physical abuse, Amber said, her voice steady now despite the tears still flowing. It was the gaslighting. Having someone you love tell you that what you experienced didn't happen, that your pain isn't real, that you're crazy, dramatic, unstable. Imagine loving someone so much that you start to believe them when they tell you that your own reality is wrong. How did that change who you were? I started questioning everything. My own memory, my own sanity. I would have arguments with myself about whether something actually happened or if I had imagined it. I became so afraid of being wrong that I stopped trusting my own instincts. She pressed her palm against her chest. I lost myself completely. I became this person who apologized for existing, who second-guessed every feeling, every reaction. I was walking on eggshells in my own life, terrified that any emotion I showed would be used as evidence that I was unstable. Oprah nodded, recognizing the psychological warfare that many abuse survivors described. And then you spoke up. And then I spoke up, Amber repeated, but her voice carried no triumph, only exhaustion. I naively thought that truth would be enough, that if I just told my story, people would listen, that women would understand, that justice would follow. But that's not what happened.
No. What happened was something I never could have prepared for.
The entire world turned into a courtroom where I was on trial not just for my claims, but for my worth as a woman. My expressions were analyzed by body language experts who had never met me. My tears were called fake by people who had never experienced real trauma. My pain was turned into viral videos, into TikTok dances, into merchandise sold to profit from my suffering. I watched as my most vulnerable moments became entertainment for millions of people eating popcorn in their living rooms. The audience in the studio shifted uncomfortably. Many of them had probably seen those very videos, shared those very memes. How do you reconcile loving someone who hurt you? Oprah asked, cutting to the heart of what many couldn't understand. Amber was quiet for a long moment, her fingers unconsciously tracing patterns on the fabric of the couch as she gathered her thoughts. You don't reconcile it, you carry it. The love doesn't disappear just because the person hurts you. If anything, it makes the hurt worse because you keep hoping they'll become the person you fell in love with again. You keep making excuses, finding reasons, believing that if you just love them enough, support them enough, they'll find their way back to being gentle. But that's not how addiction works. That's not how abuse works.
Do you still love him?
The question that millions wanted answered hung in the air. Amber looked directly into the camera for the first time during the interview. I love who he was when he was sober. I love the man who could be gentle and funny and brilliant. But I had to learn that loving someone doesn't mean staying with someone who destroys you. And it doesn't mean staying silent about what they did to you. Even when speaking up costs you everything? Even then, Amber said firmly. Because staying silent costs you more. It costs you your soul. Oprah felt the weight of that truth settle over the studio. What did it cost you, Amber? Really cost you? Everything, Amber whispered. My career, my reputation, my financial security, my peace of mind, my ability to trust my own judgment. Friends who didn't want to choose sides. Family relationships that couldn't survive the pressure. She paused, looking down at her hands again. But it also gave me something. What did it give you? It gave me back my voice. Even if the world doesn't want to hear it. Even if it's broken and imperfect and comes with a cost. It's mine again. Oprah reached over and squeezed Amber's hand. What do you want people to understand about your story? Amber took a deep breath, composing herself. I want them to understand that this isn't about Johnny versus Amber. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about what happens when we as a society decide that one person's word is more valuable than another's based on gender, on fame, on likability. You're talking about something bigger than your own experience. I'm talking about every woman who has ever been told her reality doesn't matter. Every woman who has been called crazy for speaking up. Every woman who has been forced to prove her pain in a court of public opinion. The studio was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming. Oprah knew she was witnessing something significant, not just an interview, but a moment of reckoning. What would you say to other women watching this who might be in similar situations? Amber looked directly into the camera again. I would say that your truth matters, even if no one believes it. Your pain is real, even if others question it. Your voice has value, even if the world tries to silence it. And healing is possible, even when everything feels broken. How are you healing, Amber? Slowly. Some days are harder than others. Some mornings I wake up and for just a moment, I forget what happened, and then reality crashes back in. But I'm learning to trust myself again. I'm learning that my worth isn't determined by what others think of me. I'm learning that being a mother means showing my daughter what it looks like to survive something that was meant to destroy you. It means teaching her that falling down isn't the end of the story. Getting back up is. Oprah felt tears running down her own cheeks now. What does survival look like for you today? It looks like getting up every morning and choosing to keep going. It looks like playing with my daughter and remembering what joy feels like. It looks like rebuilding a life that maybe looks different than what I planned, but it's authentically mine. And when the world feels too heavy, I remind myself that I'm not responsible for changing everyone's mind. I'm only responsible for living my truth and raising my daughter to know hers. As the interview drew to a close, Oprah looked at Amber with deep respect and something else, a recognition of shared sisterhood, of women who had survived and learned to speak their truth despite the cost. Is there anything you wish you could say to that young woman who first decided to speak up? Amber smiled through her tears for the first time in the entire interview, and in that smile there was something beautiful, a glimpse of who she might have been without all the pain, and who she was becoming despite it. I would tell her that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's speaking up despite the fear. And that sometimes the most important thing you can do is save yourself, even if the world doesn't understand. I would tell her that she's braver than she knows, and that her voice, imperfect and trembling as it might be, matters more than she can imagine. The lights in the studio gradually returned to normal, but the emotional intensity remained. Both women sat in contemplative silence, knowing they had shared something profound. Thank you, Oprah said simply. Thank you for listening, Amber replied. Really listening. As the camera stopped rolling, Oprah embraced Amber, and in that moment, both women understood that some conversations transcend television. Some truths are too important to be entertainment. Some healing happens not in spite of our wounds, but because we're brave enough to show them. The interview would go on to spark countless conversations about belief, truth, and the courage it takes to speak up when the whole world seems to be listening for you to fail. But in the quiet of that studio, it was simply two women recognizing the strength it takes to survive, and the power of being truly heard.